Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. The topic at Agri Conversation here at the Woordfees is Agri Jobs of the Future. Will you fit in? And before I introduce our panel, I'd like to find out how many people in the room are either in the agricultural sector or at the moment or looking to enter the sector in the future. If you could just give us a show of hands. Pretty much everyone. Fantastic. That's great to have you. We appreciate your time. I'm Anli Hatting. I'm a news anchor by night and an agricultural student, not in the formal sense, but entering the sector now. I'm in my third year in agricultural media and marketing. And it's such a privilege to really learn about the agricultural space alongside some of the most incredibly warm-hearted and generous people who really are very eager to share their knowledge. We have two of them with us today. Lo Pinard is a senior analyst with BFAB, Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy. Apologies, Lo. And he looks specifically at value chain analytics. Also very privileged to have with us Dr. Dirk Troski from the Agriculture Department here in the Western Cape. He is the Director of Business Planning and Strategy. His apologies from Sean Walsh, the CEO of the Cal Group and the Chairman of AGBIS. Unfortunately, he could not make today's discussion. But I'm sure we are going to have a fabulous discussion about what employment in the agricultural sector looks like in the future that affects many of you in the room. I think whether you are established in the sector at the moment or looking to enter the sector in the future, all the future changes are going to shape the role that you play in agriculture in some shape or form. So I think if we could kick off the discussion with you, Lo, if you could give us some idea of what the main drivers are that are changing employment and skills in the agricultural sector at the moment. And I know it's quite a complex issue, but if you could just give us the overview.
Great, thanks, Annie. Thanks, everyone, for joining. It's great to have all of you here. We'll probably spend the most time today here talking about the future. But maybe I'll start with quickly looking at the past, but not the quick past, the long past. So if I asked, and you started the discussion to ask who of you are in agriculture, and when I ask myself that question, or if someone asks me that question, I also say I work in agriculture, right? But if you actually a bit more technical, when we say agricultural jobs, primarily in the discussion we talk about people that work on the farm. So anything from the farm onwards would traditionally not be described as agricultural worker, yet we all work in the agricultural sector. And these days, whenever I speak on platforms like these, I say agriculture is more than agriculture. So agriculture with a capital is greater than agriculture. And this idea that we see agriculture as everything that stops at the farm gate is problematic in a sense that we don't realize that it's much broader than that. And that's why many of the people are here in this room and why our discussion about agriculture employment is much wider than just the farm. But if we start just at the farm, and I can maybe ask the audience as well, is if you had to say, let's say 50 years ago, if today we have about 850 or 900,000 people working on farms, how many would you have guessed 50 years ago would have worked in the sector? More or less, if you had to give hands, who would say there were more people working in agriculture? I have one brave person that has a hand up too. Less? Okay, the rest are remaining outstanding.
Uncommitted.
Uncommitted.
The good economist.
Yeah, it's either or. And so I think the point I'm just trying to make here is just trying to understand, if we said that, let's say, technology and advancement had an impact and will have in the future, what has it had in the past? And so if you look back 50 years, let's say the 1960s, that's actually where agricultural jobs peaked in South Africa. It's about 1.5 million jobs, give or take. And if you actually go back another 50 years, or let's say back to 1918, that was the first time South Africa did a census, so we actually have very good information about that. Then jobs were still about 700, 800,000. And so if you think about it, we've got more or less the same jobs now as basically a century ago. And so that's quite interesting, but the dynamic of that change has been very interesting. If you had to plot it on the graph, you would see it increases up until the 1960s and then gradually comes down to the 850 we have today. So let's say it grew to 1.5 and then shed about half of the jobs again. And the interesting thing of what made that balloon or graph go up and then down was not necessarily just machinery, but the type of machinery is one aspect. And typically you can see around the 1960s, that was when the combine harvester really became widespread available in South Africa. But even during that time, people were buying more tractors. So just another question for people here is, if you had to guess how many tractors were used on South Africa's farms in 1918? Any guesses? How many tractors? Now, I'm assuming many of you are thinking horses, and plows that's been driven by animals, which is not the wrong view of it. But there's an answer? 20 or 30, okay? Right? So actually the number is about 5,000, okay? Right, so obviously there was a few farms there already that was able to buy tractors, obviously all of them imported. But actually if you look at then in today's terms, or 2017 when we did the census, then we had more or less 70,000 tractors in South Africa. But also during the peak when I mentioned about the employment, there was double the amount of tractors back then. Now, I think the point I'm trying to make, it's not just the availability of technology, it's also specialization within technology. Because what happened in the 1960s is that you didn't have just tractors, but you then started to get bigger ones. And then obviously the combine was harvester, were already self-propelled machines, very sophisticated and became increasingly so. So today actually you've got fewer tractors and some machines on farms, but they're obviously highly more specialized, obviously much bigger and sophisticated. And it just shows you that, there's different tendencies over the last 100 years. But now the puzzling thing I sit with, and I'm sure Dirk will expound on that, is that we've had a lot more technology. If you think about apps and artificial intelligence and all the like, let's say in the past 10 years, than probably what we had in the last 50 years. But still, we haven't shed many jobs in the past 10 years. And so that's still puzzling to me. And I think, which I'll stop before I hand over, is just to say that the saturation point where you can substitute machines or technology for labor is still there. I don't think we've gotten to that setting where you can just really just replace because it's about the affordability of technologies. And also just I'm pessimistic on how quickly that trend will continue downward. And it's just simple. Plants, and animals, they're delicate. And if you just think you can take any crop and put a machine through it, it's not that simple, So I think those are a few remarks to start off.
So considering South Africa's vast array of agricultural commodities, it is a complex topic. What is true for one commodity area or one specialized area of agriculture is not necessarily going to be applicable to all areas. So you're going to look at different kinds of skills changes over time in different commodity areas. And just looking, for instance, at soya, 50 years ago, soya wasn't a factor in South Africa. Now that is. So we see how quickly the landscape in agriculture changes. In addition to technology, Lo, I want to touch on a couple of the other factors that are also going to play a major role in the coming years. And Dirk, perhaps if you could jump in here, things like climate change, sustainability, ESG, world markets changing. These are all things that are going to play a role in the future of agricultural jobs, not necessarily on the farm jobs, but also throughout the value chain. What are some of the big things that you're looking at?
Before I go there, may I just take a step back?
Absolutely.
I think what we must understand about agriculture is that three things. The one is we are working with biological factories. Now, and the udder of a cow at 12 o'clock looks different than the udder of a cow at milking time. And no udders of two cows look the same. The second is we are working with niche areas. Just drive through the Swartland and in Piketberg, and look at the soil and how the soil changes every 100 meters, So that is microclimates. And then you go into the Witzenberg and all the unique areas. In George, there's only 5 farms in South Africa that produce hops. And they are just outside George. Okay. And then the third is we are dependent on wide open spaces for agricultural production. So what we've seen is either high mechanization take place where you don't need the crop for the next harvest. So if you can come in with a combine harvester and you cut everything off and you put it in the maize or the wheat in a trailer and off you go and you plant a new crop. You can't do the same with fruit trees. So that is why still when you go into fruit trees, you are very labor intensive. And the same in the case of vegetable farming. Yes, in certain areas like piggeries, dairies become bigger. You can have the whole dairy under one roof. So that is where that trend also coming up. That is the movement. Okay, so what is happening now? And I think there are 2 things, and we can talk about now what makes this possible. But the one is we are now at the situation where technology can make a distinction between 2 different cattle, the color of apples. We've seen it. It is now in production where apples can be sorted according to shape, color, all those sort of things.
Blemishes,
all those sort of things. It is possible, it happens. So that brings a certain measure of automation into the harvesting area. And we are already seeing certain things in terms of, with automation, just Google. And you see all the weird and wonderful picking, apple picking and carrot picking and all those sort of mechanisms. That is there. So that is coming. The other thing that is coming, the reason why all this big machinery happened was to ensure the most efficiency of the scarcest resource that farmers have available, and that is highly skilled labor. When you put somebody on a combine harvester that costs 14 million rand, you want to make sure that that person know how to drive that, okay? So it is either a highly skilled person or yourself or your son that has got a skin in the game, okay? So that person drives that. However, what we are now seeing is, and that also drives this mega farms, because to be able to afford a 14 million rand combine harvester, you need X amount of area to be able to harvest. And it is very difficult now to bring in a new person in that environment. Okay, so what we are seeing happening is what we talk about microbots. We see drones. Everybody talk about drones, and very excited about drones flying and taking pictures and spraying here and there and things like that. Forget about the drones. It's a hobby for a lot of people. The real revolution is going to take place with small $10, 10 rand remote cars that you can buy at Macro. And those are the things that probably in the form of swarms that you will be able, in 5 or 10 years, to go through and field, light. Some of them are solar powered, picking out the weeds. Remember, this season's wheat is next season's wheat. So that artificial intelligence need to make that difference. What is a weed and what is wheat? And pick that out. And if some of them get lost and end up in a river, it's not that big a difference. So I think that is where the real difference in agriculture is going to take place. And the question is to pick up the trend break. And the trend break, I think, in normal broad based agriculture is towards micro specialization. Is that the correct word? Sorry, Afrikaans is my foreign language, you know. But on the other hand, probably in terms of horticulture, vegetable production, more specialization in terms of more automation towards things that normally was done by hands. I didn't answer your question.
That's fine. That often happens. People get carried away by the passion for the subject, which is great. We have been looking a lot at on-farm skills development over time. I think what I'd like to look at broadly is value chains, purely because what we're seeing in South Africa is this depletion of rural communities means that many people young people who have studied in big cities like Stellenbosch, even though it's not that big, it still is beautiful. It's a wonderful place to be. You can tell I come from Joburg. That's why I mention how wonderful it is here. They don't necessarily want to go and live in smaller towns, in rural communities. They want access to those urban hubs. And we're seeing a lot of different trends in urban agriculture, but also in terms of jobs further down the agricultural value chain that might not form part of those initial prime on-the-farm statistics, but which still contribute to, further down the value chain. Looking at trends that affect the young people who are choosing careers now. Where do I go? We've got two agricultural economists on the couch here. What is the future of, is that a valid career 10, 20 years down the line? Is that something we're going to have too much of? What are the things you're seeing?
Yeah, I'll have a go. To be honest, I've been asking myself this question, maybe in the last 2 years, huge advancement in these large language models or chat, language models like ChatGPT and the like.
AI.
And the question is, is there a space for ag economists doing what I'm doing? And I actually went to do a bit of a search on this to see, how well do these models currently have the ability, let's say, to do the work that I'm doing. And I don't know if it's just not as advanced, but it seems to me that there's two fundamental things that would, I think, drive whether or not your job in agriculture would be under risk of technology. And the one thing is agriculture, particularly now and in the future, will continue to be driven by human interaction. Now, just give everyone an idea here. We've got about 40,000 commercial farms and many more smaller farms. If you add, and again, back to my argument on agriculture is more than agriculture, if you then add all of the input suppliers, the banks, just go to Nampo Kaap or Nampo, the bigger one up north, and then you realize agriculture is more than agriculture. And typically a robot or, some large language models doesn't have the ability to interact on a human level. They might, evolve into being more interactive, but the reality is we want to interact with people. And I think that will stay the same. And then, so it's the interactions. But then also, even if you have large models and you've got a lot of information, so there's this discussions about big data and the like. Now, I've worked on big data sets, if you think of census, a couple of million. But still, the complexity, let's say, within ag economics, or even, like Dirk said, natural systems, they're so complex to understand. But also picking out what are the main factors. In economics, we often talk about correlation and causation and that kind of a thing. But oftentimes, studying and having experience for multiple years in something, you kind of get a gut feel and start to learn things, which I think these models will not be able to do in a way that's very targeted to give advice and the like. But I must also admit that, general just writing reports that you would currently find that I'm doing, let's say 20% of the time, I think that will definitely be replaced, by AI or robots and the like. But the question is, would you want to read rather, a report that's been written by me or Dirk or by a robot or a large language model? And which one will you trust? Now, of course, they get better over time. So I'm not saying that they're not good and they've made large advances. I think the point when we get with these models, if they start to train themselves and, the autonomousness, I don't know if that's the right word, but the fact that the machine learning process starts to grow faster than, in multiple sets that it's doing at the moment, then there is a point where I think careers would be under threat. But again, even if you think of something like medicine, a clinical field like medicine, we've got amazing technologies, but when me and you go in to the operation, I would rather want someone to do a knee or a hip and not a robot. And so I think there's limitations to the technology. But also the other question I think people must ask, and that's what I ask myself, is are you really relevant or adding value in whatever job you're doing? And that's not so easy to answer because it's not always obvious. And I think if you can, and people looking for careers in agriculture, I think there will be even more opportunities for skilled people in agriculture, whereas I don't see necessarily the same, let's say, in manufacturing or finance and the like. So I think out of all the industries, agriculture will probably be a little bit shielded by some of these fast progressions in technology rather than the other way around.
And of course, wherever there is change, not only is there perhaps a challenge, but there are also opportunities. So where technology might be changing people's roles or taking over people's roles, there will be new roles that require people to analyze the technology, to give advice based on these data sets, to interpret it, to make it accessible to people, because technology, unfortunately, because it moves so quickly, isn't accessible to everyone at the same level. And I think our farmers still really want that personal touch to help them use that information and apply it properly. I want to get away from the future just for 1 second, Dirk, and look at the kind of skills shortages that have already been identified. We see lots of trends in terms of where focus areas lie. One year you'll see a lot of new talent coming into a specific area, and just to give an example, silo managers has been identified as a huge shortage. What other areas are we looking at?
Okay. You ask me a short question, you must be prepared for a long answer.
We've got lots of time.
Now, I think the principle here is when you graduate this year, I can guarantee you what you will be doing 40 years from now will be significantly different from what you have been trained to be doing.
But that's in every field. That's not just in agriculture, right?
That's in everything.
Absolutely.
Well, I graduated in '84 from this university, and what I've done, my tools that I had at that stage versus my tools that I've got today, is you can't imagine the difference. There's another debate, I think, on 30 years change, so I won't go there. I think that is fundamentally different. So what you must be prepared to do is continuous learning. Okay, so I think that's the one point. The second point is very difficult to identify now things that will be in shortage. Because there may now be a shortage of plant breeders or silo managers. But there are also so many, and that is a demand, and that where there's a demand, supply will follow.
Yeah.
Can I use an example? In 1883, there was a bill passed in the UK that required there must be a person with a red flag in front of a vehicle not drawn by animals, and another person with a red flag at the back. Okay, that was the bill. So if that law maintained, can you imagine the mist problem that Cape Town would have had? And not the fog problem we are now. It would have been something totally different. And just imagine the impact on value chains and things like that. And imagine the impact on farriers. So for a long time, there was a lot of unemployed farriers. And now a farrier is one of the most highly paid skills that you can get. No horse owner will allow his or her 10 million rand horse to be shoed by a person that is not a good farrier. And I think the same principle apply here. The principle is, well, I think there are a few principles. The one is be prepared always to be open and to learn. The second thing is do what makes you tick. You know, it's no use you go into a certain direction because some wise guy someday told you, listen, you go into this career and you will have a job for lifetime. It's not true. It will not happen. Yeah, and I think that's the most important two things. So, yeah, I'm going to end here.
Okay. Hindsight is also 2020. And if I look back at my career and I said, well, hang on, if 25 years ago I had opened a female-only plumbing service, because let's face it, most women are alone when the plumber comes, and would you feel more comfortable with the female plumber? For sure. I would have been rolling in money. But it was impossible 25 years ago to spot that would be a need. So don't hold yourself accountable for what should or could happen in 25 years' time. You can't see into the future. But what we can see now is that there is a trend towards, or a movement towards, the need for multidisciplinary specialists. So someone who can work across a number of fields in agriculture. How does that influence how young people should prepare themselves in terms of marrying certain skills together?
Yeah, it's a good question. And well, I think the other thing that we haven't spoken about is the universities, as we know them, will also be different in 30 years. Mm-hmm. And the question, if you would do a bachelor's in agriculture, economics, the question is whether you will just do that. And I think the access to information, if you wanted to learn anything, if I wanted to become really good at mathematics, the reality is that I could probably get access to enough education to become similar to Ivy League University if I was dedicated enough and I had known how to utilize that resource. So maybe universities will also change in the future. I don't know. I work, and we at BFAP, so the Bureau for Food and Agriculture Policy, we've got about, of the total team, we've got about 70% ag economists, 1 or 2 economists, and then data scientists, industrial engineers, and then people that do, let's say, technology and IT type of things. So we're trying to build in multidisciplinarity in our work, but there's also this challenge when you become a jack of all trades and a master of none. And that's where I think what Dirk is also mentioning is you can have multidisciplinary in your thinking, but you still need to have a strong foundation, at least in one, let's say, discipline. So I would advise, let's say, if you're on, let's say, agronomy, be very strong on agronomy, all the fundamentals there. But if you happen to want to understand trading, for instance, commodities or ag economics as a subfield, nothing stops you from really on your own learning that field. But your basis or your grounding in a particular field, I think, will still be important. And it's like Dirk said, I've been, let's say, working for 10, 12 years, and I definitely have, some things I like more. And naturally, I pursue stuff that I enjoy more. For instance, the stuff that I don't enjoy, I let someone else do. So there's this progression within a field, and I think that's what's nice about agriculture, is you can find literally anything in agriculture. You're a media person, but you're sitting on the stage talking about agriculture. So the opportunities in agriculture is quite big, and you shouldn't get bogged down by, let's say, the opportunities that exist now. And I guess, there's still a big debate, let's say, out there whether or not all these technologies will really harness that dramatically. For instance, I hear now, and maybe some of the young people hear about AI, it seems to me that the ability to prompt AI is actually more valuable or it's a valuable skill for us rather than, and to interpret what's coming out there, instead of just thinking anything that comes out there will be valuable. And so I've seen people write, codes and codes, and basically the only person that can really understand how to get the best out of it will gain from it. So this idea that on its own it's very valuable is quite false. Yeah.
I think that idea, to come back to your comment, Dirk, about lifelong learning, also really opens up the opportunities to look at a multidisciplinary approach, because you might start off doing agronomy and later in your life, after the first 10 or 15 years, venture into the technology side, application, monitoring, that kind of thing. So that really does give you the scope to look at different fields, within agriculture and combining your skills. On that note, I want to look a little bit at startups, tech startups, entrepreneurial businesses within agriculture. Gone are the days where you can qualify and walk straight into a job. In my line of work, we've come across a lot of qualified young people who've got incredible marks. They have gone on to do their honors, their masters, perhaps even a doctoral, and still they struggle to access those opportunities. So I think young people have to start looking at how can you make a career for yourself rather than waiting to walk into a position at a big agricultural company or on a mega farm. But that's certainly an almal scroll. It's not necessarily easy for people to start their own businesses. How do we even start that conversation to equip young people with the skills, not only in a certain field, but those business skills and the kind of soft skills they need?
Okay, what I'm now going to say is probably controversial.
Great, we love that. We love controversy. It gets the debate going.
I think part of our problem in South Africa is too many people study management. And to come back to Lou's point, you must first have a skill. You must first have a skill, something to apply, and then afterwards you can go in. That can be part of your lifelong learning.
So too many chiefs, no Indians.
Correct. Let's be honest. Nobody is going to appoint a guy or a girl, fresh from university. Now you are now going to manage this bunch of 50-year-old electricians. That is not going to happen. You first have to have a particular skill. Qualify yourself as an agronomist or an engineer or something like that. And I think based on that, you can then start moving into this field, etc. I want to come back also to, if one look, in 2017 we did with the University of Stellenbosch Business School, we commissioned a study on the impact of the fourth industrial revolution on on the agricultural sector in the Western Cape. And the basic question we had to ask is, listen, there's all these new technologies, job shedding, all those sort of things. The short version of the long story is, listen, you must either embrace this new technology responsibly, or you are not going to remain internationally competitive. 66% of the products of the Western Cape gets exported. So if we don't embrace this new technology, we won't be able to compete against US, Australian, Canadian farmers in the market out there. But what they also say is there is not one technology. The power is not in any one technology. The power is in a combination of technologies. And for that combination, you need an engineer, you need a guy that's able to use big data. You need to have somebody as simple as safety. Know about the safety in the workplace to do certain things. So there's a lot of skills involved in this particular thing. And I think to come back to your question, in my experience, is real innovation take place where people establish a rapport with each other. You know, you can have as many agreements signed on piece of paper, this institution will work with that institution, etc. But in the end, you need an engineer and an agronomist and a guy with big data knowledge who find each other and say, listen, here's an interesting project. Let us work together and build on this. And I think, okay, where to start? Well, I think that's the one way of going. But I just want to use another example that we did. You know, that was again in 2020, just after COVID. And everybody talked about augmented reality, virtual reality. We don't have the foggiest idea what that means to agriculture. So at that stage, University of the Western Cape had a postgraduate school, and we said, listen, guys and girls, sorry, we will buy for you a 3D camera on one condition. Your practicals must have an agricultural application. Okay. And the reason for that is we wanted to see what it can, for agriculture, but we want to apply the minds of that young people with their skills in agriculture. Perhaps they can see there's a career for them in agriculture. So, okay, so they did that. They had some 2 or 3 very exciting projects. One of them, for instance, was on the back of a wine bottle, a QR code. You, in Sainsbury, you take that bottle off the shelf, you scan it with your cell phone, and you get a 3-dimensional video of the farm. You walk through the cellar. You talk to the winemaker. You know, how is that for marketing? You know, from the perspective of people that want to go into AR, VR technology.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about markets, seeing as that you've brought that up now. In the Western Cape, a lot of the produce here is for export, but whether it's for export or not, consumer preferences more and more are determining what our farmers produce. Sustainability, traceability, health-conscious eating, that's all having an impact on buying and consumer patterns, locally and abroad. How is that going to influence jobs of the future? Because understanding marketing is such a complex thing, and being able to translate that into how we produce, when we produce, and how that is packaged for consumers is very important. Yet I think sometimes that's not necessarily done by people in agriculture. We leave that to marketing specialists who don't understand agriculture. Is there a niche, a gap for people?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't want to knock my sub-profession economics, but I'll give you an example of that. I was just sort of reading on, some more wider than agriculture. And there was an economist that did some very interesting stuff on tax data and the like. But then I just read the executive summary, and I realized that this person, even though he's an economist and at a prestigious university, all the right credentials and education, but then coming up with just looking at the results and the arguments behind it, I said, very few people actually understand agriculture. And I mean, we know in the US and others, you need to take children to a farm and explain to them. It just doesn't come out of a machine, right? And unfortunately, we actually in South Africa on a same journey, although I think the difference here is that we still have a very close connection. Someone in the family, opa, oma, maybe an aunt or uncle would have some connection, and we still have a very fond let's say appreciation for farming, I think, in large parts of South Africa. But I mean, that becomes the distance between the consumer and the farm and as you say, the marketing side behind this, just to explain someone the complexities in agriculture. For me and Dirk, we know about it because we've studied it. We're close to the farm and we understand those dynamics. But I mean, for instance, just think of this whole marketing side. People want safe food, but they also want to pay as little for that food as possible. Now and then you get the same people in very high positions, and I won't say as controversial stuff as Dirk did, but then you have people that say, we're going to go for a minimum wage plus 3%, or even 10% if you're a union. And I'm not anti-union or anything, but just think about what that would do if you applied that but that same person wants to buy food at half that price. So oftentimes there's this juncture between, let's say, safe food and the process, and then the cost that it takes to get it there. So the challenge we have in, let's say, marketing or all of these other disciplines that need to make a contribution, I believe it's crucial for them to understand the process, the complexity of value chains and the like, and not pull them further away from the farm. And that's where I think it's not great that we sit with many views out there about agriculture, but it's not very well informed. So maybe a starting point for, let's say, professions where there will be opportunities is for people to understand the complexity as we've come to learn it. And then there's a greater appreciation, and I think it will add jobs and opportunities. But the further pulling away from the farm is a bit of a challenge, and I think technology will increase that juncture. I don't know, Dirk.
I won't ask you the same question I asked you at Bredasdorp. No, I think the principle is a farmer or anybody in agriculture make the decision in which value chain do you want to be caught. Do you want to be caught in a commodity value chain? In other words, I produce maize or wheat, and the consumer that eat his or her wheat bix don't know where that wheat comes from. That's the one value chain. And then you are in the rat race. And you must, with the new technology, you will always be under pressure. You had a discussion on the cost price to knoop down. That is your reality, so you must always be efficient. Or the alternative is, how do we use technology to bring the farm closer to the market? Now, traditionally, and you still see it to a large extent in certain European countries. On a Saturday, there's a farmer's market. You go to the farmer, and you've got a connection with a certain person. You buy your tomatoes here and your carrots there, etc. To a certain extent, it happens with butchery still here. I've got my butchery where I go to. I know the guy, and he gives me the best piece of meat. But how do you now, if you are in the export market, how do you use new technology to bring the message over on that side? I've just used one example, 3D technology. But everybody knows about blockchain. Now, if you talk about blockchain, you think immediately finances and things like that. But blockchain is nothing but an assurance system, a surety system. In the past, you had a relationship with a particular producer. You can't have that relationship anymore, but via this blockchain you can have that assurance as consumer that what is that badger friendly honey actually means something. It is not just another cool phrase. So and I think that is probably one of the things again, how do we use these modern technologies to bring certain, and it won't be all consumers. There are consumers that only purchase according to the price, but they are and can only afford to purchase according to the price. But there are other consumers that has got other interests, be it animal, environment, culture, whatever. How do we bring that information into the marketplace to give the consumer an opportunity to make an informed choice?
Maybe, Annelie, if I can, you asked a very important question that I just want to speak to, this question about young people, opportunities in agriculture, and I just want to make two comments there. I've been thinking about this. We talk about land reform and really trying to get our let's say, dualism in the agriculture sorted out. And I was thinking, why don't we focus and get in our land reform programs graduate students that are studying agriculture and really train them up to be the commercial farmer of the day. And now obviously there are challenges there because those, let's say, students that come out of university, they do have oftentimes, good opportunities elsewhere. But if you think about the typical commercial farmer or bigger farmer of the future with technologies and the stuff we talk about, then typically you will start at a different place than we are starting at the moment for who we select as beneficiaries there. But the other point you made on young people and starting businesses is like, I've just been reading quite a bit, and I actually learned farming. I've studied economics, and I have an idea of markets, but I actually learned how to farm watching YouTube clips. So just for people in the audience, also I've been reading scientific journals and stuff to understand, but literally I was standing in front of my orchard and say, how will I tell my workers to prune, for instance? And then you stand there, it's like, I don't know. So literally go to YouTube. So you can do that. Obviously, there's limits to understand when you do the wrong thing and the right thing. But really, we need to encourage young people to start their own businesses and become entrepreneurs, even if it doesn't mean full-time. Maybe get a job somewhere else, but do something else and start a business, even if it's in agriculture or outside. Because this idea that we'll, for your lifetime, just work for a salary, we need more innovative young minds to start businesses young and really push on. And of course it's difficult. And there's discussions on finance and the like. But at least what we can say here for the jobs of the future is I think young people today wouldn't, similar to the older generation, stay with a company for 10, 15 years. I mean, it might be 2-3 years, start there and you hone your skill set. But the mindset should be, I want to create something valuable so that I can do something else and create a business or be an entrepreneur of the future, or a business leader, or make an impact. And I think that's my point, which I'll end this off, is just to say, if you really want to make a value add or contribution to society, then probably your best place to do that in a local setting is to start something and pursue your skill set. If it means that you progress then very fast, let's say, in opportunities to become a business leader within an existing company, but typically with the oversupply of very highly skilled people, your best chance is probably to start your own thing.
And there's so many incredible examples of young people who work together, come up with really innovative ideas, and with a shared pool of skills and knowledge, can make a go of it as a sort of mini collective. And there are really incredible stories. I think expose yourself to those stories, know what's going on, talk to your peers, be active online, and know what the trends are, what's going on. Something I just wanted to throw out there is, just linking back to an earlier point, is this growing activism in agriculture, where we see a lot of pushback internationally about production methods. And international trend spotters have said, but hang on, this is something that is going to grow in the future, and we're going to need professionals in the agricultural space to demystify or push back against this activism, to say, but hang on, you're saying farmers use too many chemicals. And that's what people are reading in magazines, newspaper articles, they're seeing YouTube videos, but what's really happening on the ground? So there is an incredible space within media activism to tell the truth, and to really communicate with consumers about how their food is produced, so that there is a greater understanding. So that's something to consider. We've got about 10 minutes left. I want to see if there are any questions from the audience, the points that you'd like us to touch on before we wrap up today's discussion. Any questions from the audience? Please don't be shy. I know you were shy to sit in the first rows. Our arms are very short, so we couldn't have done you any harm anyway, but questions can't hurt. Nobody. Well, that means we've done our job very well. In that case, I want to ask about our government policies, Dirk, and I think you probably be best placed to answer this. There are so many initiatives, like you said, agreements between institutions and companies that don't always necessarily bear the kind of fruit that we want to see. Do government policies, international regulations play a big role in shaping employment of the future? Or is that a perception and the reality lies, that the people in the sector are actually empowered?
It's a very difficult question. But I want to give you an example. So you are taking off from Cape Town International Airport in a 737, and just as you go over Tygerberg Mountain, a drone 40 kilograms full of pesticides fly into your 737. And down you go. That's the reality. Okay? So that is why when you fly a drone, and we've as a department, we've walked that route. We decided we can't give advice to farmers if we do not follow the rules. And that means that we as a department has to be legal in the way we fly drones, our pilots need to be legal, and it is a lot of schlep. But the reason for that is, okay, to come back, so why do government make rules? Government make rules to protect the citizens of the country. We may sometimes think these rules are silly, but there are certain instances where this makes sense. However, there are certain things where I think we are over-regulating. For instance, in South Africa, the rules say if there's a drone, each drone must have one pilot. Not a pilot, but there must be a person in control of that drone.
You can't have 3 drones, one person.
No, yeah. So that is, you've seen at the Winter Olympics a couple of years back, instead of fireworks, they had this magnificent drone displays, and lights go on and off, etc. That's illegal in South Africa. So I think there are certain areas where we can progress, make it easier. But then why do you want to fly a drone? If your purpose is to take measurements of the soil and things like that, why don't you use a remote vehicle that you can buy at Macro and put in the right sensor and off you go, things like that. So there's also ways of going around that. I think there are certain things where we've got challenges. For instance, particularly in terms of pesticides, where something is acceptable in Europe, it first must be tested in South Africa. The volumes of purchase is not enough, which make it illegal to be used in South Africa. So there's a lot of those challenges, but I don't want to go into detail. I think, yes, government must be responsive, but always accept that there are reasons why government has got rules. Just in Stellenbosch, in my neighborhood, they're talking about the Eastern Bypass. Now, that has been on the cards for about, since I bought a home in Paradijskloof in 1988. It's been on the cards, and everybody that drives into Stellenbosch every morning talk about the traffic in Stellenbosch. Okay? Now there's the idea of this bypass, and do you know how many people object against this particular thing? So the principle is, you've got a nice idea, development, I want to do this, jobs, employment opportunities, market, etc. There will be people that has got another opinion. And in between is a government official that has to take a final decision this way or that way.
And there are also opportunities there for those who feel passionate about shaping those rules that are put in place to grow and strengthen and support agriculture. There's a place for you too. Lo, I want to end off with you. We haven't spoken much about climate change, sustainability, ESG, carbon credits, carbon tax. All of these things are going to change drastically over the next 10 to 20 years. There is going to be a lot more pressure on our farmers to not necessarily change what they're doing because they're already doing the right things, but to show and to prove and to keep record of what they're doing. But is that going to create job opportunities in that space specifically for niche climate agriculture specialists?
I was hoping you're not going to ask me that question.
I'm so glad you got the question.
No, thanks for that. I've got multiple things which I would like to say. I'll just try and repackage them. So there's definitely opportunities there. One thing I do know is that the trajectory of these discussions has been kind of slowed down. I don't know if many of you saw when you push farmers too hard, they will respond. And in particular in Europe in the last few months, you know, the European Union's got this new policy, the Green Deal, and there was a lot of discussions. And they just kept on pushing on this, let's say, sustainability front and the like, which I'll be the first one to admit, even as a farmer myself, you wouldn't want to spray unnecessary red line pesticides, for instance. But also if you stand in the field, you've made a few million investment, and you're standing there and your whole crop is being eaten by some kind of a pest, then you sit with a dilemma. And that dilemma, the guy in the urban area or the guy in Europe buying his food at Tesco's or wherever will never face. Now, I'm not saying that the impact of those are not bad for the environment or it has some implication on climate change, which we can't really measure over time. And I think that's where my difficulty comes in. I do a lot of work with these international think tanks about climate. And then I sit in the one presentation and I see a map of how climate change would be in the next 50 years. And then 2 weeks later, I sit in another similar discussion on climate, and they throw up another internationally recognized climate model, and they have different colors on what will happen. The one says dark and red, and so basically warmer and drier. And the other one says for the same area, largely, let's say over India, the opposite, like wetter and cooler. And then I put up my hand and I ask, I just want to understand these multi-billion-dollar investment in models, but you say you're getting the opposite answer. Mm-hmm. And then you get, these answers that just if you're a normal person and listen to this, say it doesn't make sense. But so you have those talk shops on climate, which I don't like, but I didn't say this year, so edit that out.
We'll cut that part out.
Just please cut it out. But just saying that definitely this drive towards ESG and climate, there is a role for everyone to play in making sure that it's sensible. Sensible, but opportunities for people to make a difference. This kind of very vague thing, I wouldn't pursue a career in this area if it continues to be as vague and you can't really put your hand on it. So I'm very much for practical solutions, whether that involves technologies or not. But also, like you said earlier, I'll just give a quick example. The tannie in Cape Town, in the southern suburbs, that, let's say, very angry about, let's say, agricultural development in greenfields. Then I say, okay, let's just pull that back. Let's take your property that you just bought or many years ago for 10 million. What kind of land was that before it was residential urban land? Agricultural land. So I just think you pull that just back to general discussions, but I'm definitely for move in sustainability where it makes economic sense. And we have that as well already happening. But if you push too hard, like we saw in Europe, you get thousands of farmers marching in their tractors to the European Commission, and they said enough is enough. We don't want that kind of a situation. I'm much more for networks and partnerships where people agree on the challenges we have, and you move forward in a sustainable way. But you just bluntly say all farmers must cut pesticide use by 50%. And again, they don't have, especially in Europe and in the US, they don't have a clue for what the challenges are that farmers face here and what impacts that will have socially and the like. So yes, there's an opportunity, but it needs to be sensible and grounded in where we are now.
Plus, if you can imagine that procession of tractors and how far farmers had to come with their tractors to join that protest, petrol is or diesel is far too expensive in South Africa for that to be feasible here. So we don't want to see that happen. unfortunately the conclusion of our talk. I would like to thank my two panelists. Thank you for your time, for your expertise, for your insights. Thank you to our audience. We appreciate your time, your ears. We would have liked some questions, but we love that you listened, that you were here. I would like to ask you, as you are leaving, there is still another production happening in the auditorium here. If you could leave as quietly as possible down in the foyer, you can go mad and make a ruckus and rave about how wonderful the session was, but just so that we don't disturb them. Thank you so much for attending this discussion of Agri in Conversation today.
Thanks.